Howdy all and welcome. This is Mike from It's Fine Gaming. We're back in Homebrew, and today we're going to be taking a look at 2-axis turrets. Now this is a bigger tank that I made for Sears and I. Driver sits up here in the front, and we have a 2-axis turret right here in the front that's going to be right behind the driver, and the driver actually controls. And the gunner is going to be in the larger turret here in the rear. And both of these are 2-axis, and we're going to be taking a look and kind of breaking those down in the shop. Now this tank I did a little bit differently because I wasn't too comfortable with the tank setup I had before, where these set of tires would go and this set of tires would go in the other direction to make it turn or to spin. I actually have the first 4 and the rear 4 steering tires in opposite directions, and I can show that right like this. And I found it a little bit easier to drive, and that's just a personal preference because you can just as easily set these up to be set up on 2 of these engines and these 4 on these 2 engines and control them independently, more like a tank would be. Now let's take a look at our first turret here, which is controlled by the driver. Turn on the physics. Okay, and I can spin, and I'm using the arrow keys. And what makes this a 2-axis, because right now we're just using 1 axis, is this pitching action right here. So that is what is different from this video than my first video on single axis. And if you haven't watched that, I would definitely advise you to do that, because some of what we're going to be talking about, well, pretty much all we're going to be talking about is going to be building off that first video. Let's go ahead and take a look at our rear seat. Go ahead and control that. And because this gunner has no driver inputs, I just have it wired up to the WASD keys. I do have to activate it though. There we go. We can see that right there. It's 1 axis, and there is our 2nd axis. And we can see the gun up here is set up to link with the driver's view, and you can see it's constantly looking in the same direction that I am. Alright, let's go ahead and get out of this and move forward here. Alright, so our first turret here, which is controlled by the driver, has 2 rotational gyroscopes, 1 for each axis that we're utilizing. Now, I'm not going to take this apart too much because it's pretty open. I think we can see everything we need to. The turret itself is this capsule that is connected to the hinge, which is connected to the rest of the body. And I have 2 gyroscopes down here that's designed to help dampen this rotational gyroscope. And you need to position this so the pins are vertical. This is going to control, if this was a helicopter, it'd be the yaw, because it's going to spin. Let me go ahead and demonstrate that. Control. Oh, gotta lock the screen. Left and right. Just like that. Alright, now let's take a look at our 2nd gyroscope right here. These pins are right along this axis, which is what our Browning M2s are connected to. So this will control the pitch if this was a helicopter, just like so. And you can see that it's a little bit different than my first design or my first tank, because I'm not actually connecting to the connector blocks. I'm connecting right to the pin itself, which is actually connected to this hinge. Now, center of gravity is far more important on this gyroscope than it is on the first. The first one is pretty much locked in to this joint, this 360-degree joint, hinge joint. But because I'm pretty symmetrical and it's locked into that, I don't have to have the center of gravity in the rotational gyroscope. Actually, the tank itself, the lower frame's center of gravity, which is the 1900 here, is actually in my rotational gyroscope, and the one for the turret is 177, is up in my battery pack. Now, for my 2nd axis here, which would be the pitch, it's far more important to have the center of gravity straight in line. It doesn't have to necessarily be left-right. It has to be right on this axis if I'm looking from the side. because if I had the center of gravity too far forward, it would constantly be pitching down. I could raise it up, but then it would just fall back down. But right now, because I have it so close, there's not a whole lot of fall in either direction. And I do have a gyroscope connected to this as well, right here, to help dampen that movement. I guess for an extra touch, I added a camera with a monitor. You can see that right here for the driver, so he can get a better vantage point of what he's shooting at. That's pretty much the first turret. I do have the batteries localized for to control all the gyroscopes and the weapons. Now the larger one in the rear, this one is pretty much the same setup. Down here I have a lower capsule that has my rotational gyroscope, that has the pins vertical, so my axis is going to be spinning around that. And let me go ahead and demonstrate. Just like this. Alright. And my upper portion is controlled by this second one. Let me go ahead and lock and control. And you can see that's going to control the pitch. So it's pretty much the same setup as my front, but it's being controlled by a different chair and it's of a much larger scale. Now, again, the lower center of gravity, which is the 714 kilograms, does not necessarily have to be in line. As you can see, if I put myself in line with the rotational gyroscope, which is right here, it's the outline, best I can, it's actually slightly forward. But because it does not have that freedom to roll forward, it's all right. Now, on the second one, it's far more important, just like the first. And if I can get lined up, we're looking at the 138 kilogram. I know there's so many center of gravities, it's easy to get lost. But we're pretty close to being in the center, so we're not going to be constantly pitching forward or back. And this does take some tweaking. On this setup, I actually was placing single cube blocks, and if I switch to this mode, you can actually see the blocks that I was placing. And if I were to, say, take off one, and I bake that, go back, and if all I do is just hit the physics on, you can see it's going to start pitching forward far more than the back set. Now let's go back and place that single cubicle back in that position. And actually, let's place another 2. Oop. Right there. Right there. We're going to bake this. And we're going to take a look at it. Let's see if it makes a big difference. Now it's starting to pitch backwards. So you can do a lot of tweaking and peeking on this trying to get it right. But let's get back to our back here. Now, I had spent a lot of time trying to get the center of gravity in the middle. And yeah, it's pretty much the same turret. It's 2 axes. This seat controls everything in the rear. He has a monitor that's attached to this camera here. And the cannon on the top tracks his view. Now, the thing to be watchful about, because there, like I said before, there are so many centers of gravity floating around, this 1900 is only for the lower tank. So it includes all the tires, the engines, my fuel, this seat, but it does not take into account everything on this side of each hinge. Each side of this hinge is going to be this center of gravity and this center of gravity. And then on the next hinge, the smaller ones on the sides for the pitch, which are right here, are represented by the 138 and the 78. So when you consider the total center of gravity, all these must be factored in. So my total is center of gravity for driving purposes is not this low. It's actually going to be much higher, somewhere up in here, and that is reflected by my driving, because I have rolled this over. Even though I made it extremely wide, or at least what I considered wide, I can still roll this quite easily because of all the mass that's up here that is not reflected in this number. So I'm thinking that's it. Center of gravity still important, but not as critical as I discovered through my helicopter excursions. So I'm pretty sure this is it. Thanks for watching. This is Mike from It's Fine Gaming. I hope this video was helpful, and hope to see you again.